The battlefield was quiet now, but it was not peaceful. The air was heavy with smoke and ash. Broken ships were scattered across the ground like dead giants, and the sky above was dark, covered in thick clouds from the war that had just ended. Captain Elias Varn walked slowly through the ruins, his boots pressing into burned metal and dust, each step echoing in the silence. He did not look around much. He had seen enough already. His armor was damaged, his face tired, but his eyes were still sharp, still focused. His mission was simple, clear, and cold. Eliminate all remaining alien life. No survivors, no mercy. He repeated those words in his mind as he moved forward, his weapon ready in his hands, scanning the area carefully. Every shadow, every broken piece of metal could hide danger or something still alive. The war had been long and brutal. Humans had lost many, and so had the aliens. No one really knew who started it anymore. Only that it had to end, and now Elias was here to make sure it truly did. A soft sound broke the silence. Elias stopped walking. He turned his head slightly, listening carefully. His grip on the weapon tightened, his body ready for anything. There it was again, faint, weak, almost like the wind. But not quite, it sounded like crying. He frowned. That did not make sense. Aliens did not cry like humans, or at least that was what he had been told. He took a slow step toward the sound, then another, moving carefully between the wreckage, his eyes scanning every direction. The sound came from a broken alien pod, half buried under metal and dust. Its surface cracked open, faint lights flickering inside. Elias stood still for a moment, thinking, this could be a trap, a trick. Aliens were known for strange tactics. The sound came again, weaker this time. He moved closer, step by step, slow and silent. He reached the pod and looked inside. What he saw made him freeze. Inside the broken pod, curled into a small corner, was a tiny alien child. It was small, fragile, its skin pale with faint glowing lines, its body shaking. One of its arms looked injured, and its breathing was uneven. Its large eyes slowly looked up at him, filled with fear, but it did not attack. It did not move in anger. It only watched him, shaking. Elias raised his weapon, his training taking control. His finger moved to the trigger. No survivors. That was the order. The child made a soft sound, almost like a weak cry, and slowly reached out one small hand toward him, not to fight, not to attack, but to ask for help. Elias stopped. His finger froze. For a moment, everything went silent again. Even the distant wind seemed to disappear. Memories flashed in his mind. Battles, explosions, friends lost in the war. The anger, the pain, the orders he had followed without question. This was the enemy. This was what he was sent to destroy. But this was just a child. The small hand was still reaching toward him, shaking, weak, trusting in a way that made no sense. Elias slowly lowered his weapon, his breathing heavy, his eyes still locked on the child. He stepped closer, carefully, not wanting to scare it. The child did not move away. Instead, it moved slightly closer to him, as if it had already decided. Elias knelt down beside the broken pod, his voice low, rough, but softer than before. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. The child blinked slowly, as if trying to understand. Elias looked around quickly, checking the area. Human ships would arrive soon, and when they did, they would not hesitate. He knew what they would do. He looked back at the child, its small hand still reaching. For a second, he hesitated again. Then he made his choice. Elias carefully reached out and took the child's hand. It was cold, fragile, but it held onto him tightly. Something changed in that moment, something he could not explain. A distant sound echoed in the sky. Human ships. They were coming. Elias looked up, then back at the child, his jaw tightening. He whispered, barely audible, "I'm not leaving you." And with that, he lifted the alien child into his arms. Just as the shadows of human ships began to cover the broken battlefield, the sound of human ships grew louder in the sky, heavy engines cutting through the silence. Shadows moved across the broken battlefield as large carriers began to descend, their lights scanning everything below, searching, judging, ready to destroy anything that moved. Elias held the small alien child close to his chest, its body light and weak, but its grip on his armor tight, as if it already knew that letting go meant danger. He moved quickly now, no longer walking slowly, his steps careful but faster, his eyes searching for a place to hide. "Stay quiet," he whispered, though he knew the child might not understand his words. Still, the child made no sound, only breathing softly, its glowing lines dim, almost like it was trying to hide itself. Elias spotted a half-collapsed structure nearby, part of an old alien building, broken walls, dark inside, perfect for hiding. He rushed toward it and slipped inside just as a bright scan light passed over the ground where he'd been standing seconds before. Inside, it was dark and cold, the air thick with dust, pieces of metal hanging loose from the ceiling, every small sound echoing. Elias crouched down behind a large piece of debris and carefully placed the child beside him. For a moment, they just stayed there, silent, listening. Footsteps, human soldiers had landed. Voices came through the cones, sharp and clear. "Spread out, check every corner, no survivors." Elias closed his eyes for a second, hearing the same words again, the same orders he had followed his whole life. Now he was hiding from them. The child shifted slightly, and Elias quickly placed his hand gently over its shoulder, keeping it still. "Please," he whispered, "stay quiet." The footsteps grew closer, metal boots stepping over broken ground, weapons ready. A scanning drone floated past the broken wall, its red light moving slowly, searching. Elias held his breath, his heart beating hard. The child looked up at him, its large eyes calm but watching, trusting him without question. The red light moved closer, closer. Then suddenly, the child's faint glowing lines flickered once. The drone paused. Elias felt a cold wave of fear. It had noticed something. The drone turned slightly, its light pointing directly toward their hiding spot. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon, ready to act, even if it meant everything would end here. But then, something strange happened. The child slowly lifted its small hand. No sudden movement, no fear, just calm. A soft, almost invisible wave passed through the air. The drone's light flickered, then it turned away, as if it had seen nothing. It moved on, continuing its search in another direction. Elias stared at the child, surprised, confused. "What was that?" he whispered under his breath. The child lowered its hand and leaned slightly closer to him, as if seeking safety again. Elias did not understand what he had just seen. But one thing was clear. This child was not normal. The voices of soldiers came closer. "Sector clear so far," one of them said. "Keep checking," another replied. "Command wants 0 mistakes." Elias knew he could not stay here for long. Sooner or later, they would search inside. He looked down at the child, its eyes slowly closing and opening. Weak, tired, it needed food, rest, safety, things this place could not give. Elias reached into his pack and pulled out a small ration pack. He opened it quickly and broke off a small piece. He hesitated for a second, unsure if the child could even eat human food. Then he slowly offered it, holding it in front of the child. The child looked at it, then at him. Slowly, it reached out and took the small piece. Its movements weak but careful. It brought the food close, paused, then took a small bite. Elias watched closely, ready for any reaction. But the child did not reject it. Instead, it ate slowly, as if it had not eaten in a long time. A small sense of relief passed through Elias. "Good," he whispered, almost to himself. For a moment, the war felt far away. The orders, the mission, everything. It was just him and a small, hungry child. But that moment did not last long. A loud voice suddenly echoed outside. "Captain Elias Varn, report your position." Elias froze. That was his commander. "They are calling you." Another voice followed. "Closer now. We lost your signal. Respond immediately." Elias looked toward the broken entrance, then back at the child. If he answered, they would find him. If he stayed silent, they would start searching harder. The child looked up at him again, its eyes quiet, waiting, trusting. Elias took a slow breath, his mind racing. Then he made his choice. He turned off his comm device. cutting the signal completely. Silence outside. The voices grew sharper, more alert. Captain Varn is not responding. Search the area. Elias closed his eyes for a second, knowing what this meant. There was no going back now. He was no longer just a soldier following orders. Now he was something else, someone who had chosen. And as he looked at the small alien child beside him, holding the last piece of food carefully in its tiny hand, Elias understood one thing clearly. He had just become the enemy of his own side. The broken structure was no longer safe. Voices of human soldiers echoed closer, their movements sharp and careful. They were no longer just searching. Now they were hunting. Elias knew he had to move. Staying here would only end one way. He looked at the small alien child beside him. It had finished the little food he gave, but its body still looked weak, its breathing slow, its glowing lines faint but steady. "Can you walk?" Elias whispered softly, though he knew the child might not understand. The child tilted its head slightly, watching him, then slowly tried to stand. Its small legs shaking, it took one step, then almost fell. Elias quickly reached out and caught it, holding it steady. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice softer than he had ever used before. The child looked up at him, its eyes calm, no fear now, only trust. Without thinking much, Elias lifted the child into his arms again, holding it close. "All right, we move together," he murmured. He stepped out of the broken structure carefully, checking both sides before moving. The battlefield was still filled with smoke and shadows, but now it felt different, more dangerous. Searchlights moved across the ground in long, slow lines. Drones floated above, scanning everything, and human soldiers spread out across the area. Elias moved between the wreckage, using broken ships and debris for cover. Every step controlled, every movement quiet. The child stayed still in his arms, its small hand gripping his armor again. After a few minutes, they reached a deeper part of the ruins, where the ground dropped slightly, forming a narrow path between large broken structures. It was darker here, safer. Elias slowed down and finally stopped behind a large piece of metal. Taking a short breath, the child shifted slightly, then looked up at him again. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then the child made a soft sound, something new, not just a cry. "Ra!" Elias blinked, surprised. "Ra!" The child repeated softly, reaching one small hand toward his face. Elias frowned slightly, confused. "Ra! What does that mean?" he whispered. The child touched his cheek gently, then pointed at him. "Ra!" Elias stayed silent for a moment, then gave a small, tired smile. "You mean me," he said quietly. The child made the same sound again, a little stronger this time. "Ra!" Elias exhaled slowly. Something about that simple sound felt strange, different from everything he had known. He had been called many things, soldier, captain, weapon, but never this. He adjusted his grip slightly, holding the child more comfortably. "All right," he said softly, "if that's what you call me. Then I'm Ra." The child seemed calm, almost satisfied, and leaned slightly against him. They stayed there for a few seconds, resting in silence. Then suddenly, the child's body stiffened slightly. Elias noticed it immediately, his eyes sharpening. "What is it?" he whispered. The child looked toward the left side of the ruins, its glowing lines flickering faintly. Elias followed its gaze, but saw nothing at first. Then, a second later, he heard it. Footsteps, close, too close. Elias quickly moved lower, pressing against the metal, holding the child close. A group of human soldiers passed just a few meters away, their weapons ready, their helmets scanning the area. "Movement was detected here," one of them said. "Stay alert," another replied. Elias held his breath again, his body completely still. The child did not move either, its small hand gripping him tighter. One soldier stopped for a moment, turning slightly toward their position. Elias slowly moved his hand toward his weapon, ready for the worst. But before anything could happen, the child's glowing lines flickered again, slightly brighter this time. A soft wave passed through the air, almost impossible to see. The soldier paused, then looked away. "Nothing here," he said, and continued walking. The group moved on, their footsteps fading into the distance. Elias stayed still for a few more seconds, then slowly exhaled. He looked down at the child, his expression serious now. "That's twice," he whispered. "You did that twice." The child blinked slowly, as if it did not fully understand what it had done. But Elias understood enough. This child was not just surviving, it was protecting him. He leaned back slightly against the metal, his mind racing. All his life, he had been told that aliens were dangerous, unpredictable, a threat that had to be destroyed. But this small being in his arms, it had done nothing but trust him, follow him, and now even protect him. Elias looked down again, his voice low, almost thoughtful. "You're not what they said you are," he murmured. The child watched him quietly, its eyes reflecting the soft light. For the first time since the war began, Elias felt something different. Not anger, not fear, but something close to responsibility. A need to protect. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed through the ruins. Louder than before, a heavy engine, not a normal patrol unit. Elias looked up, his expression changing instantly. "That's not good," he said under his breath. The child's glowing lines flickered again, stronger this time, as if reacting to something far more dangerous. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon and stood up slowly. "Looks like they found something," he said quietly. Then he looked down at the child one more time. "Stay close, all right." The child held onto him tighter, and in that moment, Elias realized something important. This was no longer just about hiding. Now, they were being hunted for real. The deep sound of the heavy engine grew louder, echoing across the broken ruins. It was not like the small patrol ships from before. This one was bigger, stronger, and far more dangerous. Elias stepped back into the shadows, his body tense, his eyes scanning the sky through the cracks in the broken structures. A large black dropship slowly descended, its engines pushing dust and ash into the air. The ground trembled slightly as it hovered above the battlefield. "This is bad," Elias whispered under his breath. The side doors of the ship opened, and heavily armored soldiers dropped down one by one, their movements fast, controlled, and precise. These were not normal troops, these were elite hunters. Elias recognized their armor immediately. "Shadow unit," he said quietly, his voice tight. They were sent only when something important needed to be found or destroyed, which meant one thing. They were here for the child. The small alien in his arms shifted slightly, its glowing lines becoming a little brighter. Reacting to the presence of danger, Elias adjusted his grip, holding it closer. "We need to move now," he said softly. He turned and began moving deeper into the ruins, faster than before, but still careful, using every shadow, every broken wall as cover. Behind him, the elite soldiers spread out quickly, their helmets scanning the area. Red lights sweeping across the ground. "Energy signal confirmed," one of them said through comms. "Target is close," another replied. Elias heard every word, and his jaw tightened. "They can track you," he whispered to the child. The child looked up at him, its eyes calm but glowing slightly. Elias moved faster now, no time to slow down, no time to rest. They reached a narrow passage between two collapsed alien structures, barely enough space to move through. Elias slipped inside, hoping to lose the signal. But suddenly, a loud voice echoed through the area. "Captain Elias Varn." Elias froze instantly. He knew that voice. He slowly turned his head toward the sound. From the shadows, a tall figure stepped forward, wearing the same elite armor, but with a different mark on the chest. "Commander Rice, Elias's former superior." "You've gone silent," Rice said calmly, his weapon lowered but ready. "That's not like you." Elias said nothing, his grip tightening around the child. Rice took a few steps closer, his helmet slowly scanning Elias, then stopping. "Step aside," Rice said, his voice firm. "Whatever you're hiding, hand it over." Silence. Elias did not move. The child held onto him tighter. Rice's tone changed slightly, colder now. "Don't make this difficult, Captain." Elias finally spoke, his voice low, controlled. "It's just a child." A brief pause followed. Then a short, almost humorless laugh came from Rice. "There is no such thing as just a child in this war," he replied. "That thing is an alien." Elias shook his head slightly. "It's not a threat." Rice stepped closer, his weapon now slowly raising. "That's not your decision to make," he said. "Orders are clear, no survivors." Elias took one step back, his body shifting into a defensive stance. "I'm not leaving it," he said firmly. The air between them grew heavy, tense. Other elite soldiers began to appear behind Rice, forming a loose circle, blocking every exit. Elias looked around quickly, calculating. No easy way out. Rice's voice came again, sharper this time. "You're making a mistake." Elias replied without hesitation. "No," he said. "I already made my choice." For a second, everything stood still. Then Rice gave a small signal. The soldiers raised their weapons, and in the next moment, everything exploded into action. Elias moved fast, faster than expected. He turned sharply and ran toward the narrow passage, holding the child tightly. Shots fired behind him, energy blasts hitting the walls, sending sparks and debris flying. Elias ducked and moved through the tight space, using the environment to block direct shots. "Stop him," Rice's voice echoed. Two soldiers rushed forward, trying to cut him off on the other side. Elias saw them just in time. He slid behind a broken metal plate, then quickly leaned out and fired once, disabling one soldier's weapon. The second soldier aimed, but before he could shoot, the child's glowing lines flashed brightly. A sudden wave of force pushed outward. The soldier was thrown back hard, crashing into the wall. Elias did not stop. He kept moving, turning into another narrow path, his breathing heavy, his body pushing to its limits. Explosions echoed behind him as the elite unit continued the chase. The ground shook slightly from distant impacts, pieces of debris falling around them. Elias finally reached a lower section of the ruins, where the ground dropped into a deep, broken corridor. He jumped down carefully, landing hard but steady. For a brief moment, there was silence again. He looked down at the child, its glowing lines slowly dimming, as if the last burst of power had drained it. "You're full of surprises," Elias said quietly. The child looked up at him, weak but calm. Then suddenly, the ground above shook again. Heavy footsteps, they were not far behind. Elias looked around quickly, searching for a way out. But deep inside, he already knew the truth. This was no longer just escape, this was a hunt, and he was the target. He tightened his grip on the child and stood up again, his expression hard, determined. "Stay with me," he whispered, because now there was no turning back. The broken corridor was dark and deep, the walls cracked and covered with old alien markings. Faint lights flickered in strange colors, giving the place an eerie glow. Elias moved forward carefully, his steps slower now, his breathing heavy after the chase. Every sound around him felt louder, every shadow felt alive. Behind him, distant echoes of the elite unit could still be heard. They were searching, spreading out, closing in. "We don't have much time," Elias whispered, more to himself than to the child. The small alien rested quietly in his arms, its body weak, its glowing lines soft and unstable. The last use of its power had clearly drained it. Elias looked down at it for a moment, his expression serious. "You saved us back there," he said quietly. The child blinked slowly, as if it understood the tone more than the words. They reached the end of the corridor, where a large sealed door stood, half buried under rubble, strange alien symbols glowing faintly across its surface. Elias stopped, studying it carefully. "This wasn't here before," he murmured. The child suddenly shifted in his arms, its glowing lines reacting again, slightly brighter this time. It slowly lifted one small hand and pointed toward the door. Elias frowned. "You know this place," he said softly. The child made a faint sound, not quite a word, but something close. "Ra." Elias stepped closer to the door, brushing away some of the dust. The symbols became clearer now, forming patterns that almost looked alive. As he reached out to touch the surface, the door reacted instantly. A soft light spread across it, scanning him, then shifting toward the child. For a moment, everything went still. Then, with a low sound, the door slowly opened. Elias took a careful step inside, his weapon ready, his eyes alert. Inside, the room was different, untouched by the destruction outside. Clean surfaces, glowing panels, and a soft hum of active systems filled the space. "This is still working," Elias whispered in surprise. In the center of the room, a large floating display activated as soon as they entered. Lights forming shapes, then symbols, then images. Elias stepped closer, watching carefully. The display began to show scenes, alien worlds, peaceful cities, tall glowing structures, beings moving calmly. Not soldiers, not warriors, just living. Elias's eyes narrowed. This doesn't look like an enemy race, he said slowly. The images changed, showing the arrival of human ships, weapons, fear, confusion, then chaos, battles, destruction, both sides attacking, neither understanding the other. Elias felt a cold weight in his chest. This war, he whispered. The display shifted again, focusing now on something else. Small pods, rows of them, each one holding a child. Alien children, safe, protected, hidden. The truth hit him slowly but heavily. These were not weapons, Elias said quietly. They were hiding them. The child in his arms made a soft sound. Its glowing lines reacting again. Elias looked down at it, then back at the display. Another image appeared, showing the same type of child, but older, standing in front of massive energy fields, controlling power that could shape entire environments, not as a weapon, but as something else, something important. They're not soldiers, Elias said, his voice low. They're protectors. The display changed one last time, showing a final message in alien symbols, slowly translating into human language. Last generation, preserve at all cost. Elias stepped back slightly, his mind racing. This child, he whispered, is not just surviving, it's the last. The room suddenly flickered. Warning signals appeared across the display. Intrusion detected. Elias turned sharply toward the entrance, his grip tightening. They found us, he said under his breath. The child suddenly held onto him tighter, its body trembling slightly. Elias looked around quickly, searching for another way out. But before he could move, a loud blast echoed. The entrance door was forced open. Smoke filled the corridor as armored figures stepped inside, weapons raised. Commander Rice walked in slowly, calm as ever. I was right, he said. Looking around the room, this wasn't just a random signal. His eyes locked onto Elias, then shifted to the child. And there it is. Elias stepped back, raising his weapon slightly. You don't understand what this is, he said firmly. Rice shook his head, unimpressed. I understand enough, he replied. That thing is valuable, which means it belongs to command. The soldiers spread out, surrounding the room, blocking every exit again. Elias knew there was no escape this time. He looked down at the child for a brief second, then back at Rice. I won't let you take her, he said. Rice's expression did not change. You don't have a choice. In a sudden movement, one of the soldiers fired a stun shot. Elias tried to react, but it was too fast. The energy hit him hard, sending him to the ground. His weapon slipping from his hand, his vision blurred, his body refusing to move. The child let out a small, weak sound, reaching toward him. Rah! Elias tried to lift his hand, but he couldn't. Heavy boots stepped closer. Strong hands pulled the child away from him. No. Elias whispered weakly. The child struggled slightly, its glowing lines flickering in fear. Secure the target, Rice ordered calmly. Elias's vision faded in and out as he watched them take her. The last thing he saw was the child reaching toward him, its small hands still trying to hold onto him. Then everything went dark. The darkness in Elias's vision slowly faded, but his body still felt heavy, like it was trapped under metal and silence. His ears were ringing, and every breath felt difficult. He slowly opened his eyes, the blurred image of the ruined chamber returning. Flashing lights from broken systems, smoke still drifting in the air. They took her, he whispered weakly, his voice barely coming out. His arms trembled as he tried to move, but the stun impact still locked his body down. Nearby, the elite soldiers were already moving out, securing the captured alien child, carrying her toward the exit. Commander Rice stood near them, watching calmly. As if nothing unusual had happened, Elias tried again to move, forcing his hand forward, his fingers shaking. No, he muttered, his voice growing stronger. No, not her. He pushed himself harder, pain shooting through his body. But anger was stronger than pain. Slowly, he forced himself up onto one knee, then staggered to his feet. The soldiers noticed instantly. "Captain is recovering," one of them said. Raising his weapon, Rice turned his head slightly. "Stop him," he ordered, calm and cold. Two soldiers moved toward Elias quickly, but he was already reacting, even weakened. His training took over. He dodged the first strike, grabbed the second soldier's arm, and slammed him into the wall. His movements were not perfect, but they were desperate. Elias looked toward the exit, where the child was being taken away. Her glowing lines were faint, flickering, as she struggled weakly in the containment field. That sight broke something inside him. He grabbed his fallen weapon from the ground, but instead of firing, he threw it aside. "I won't kill you," he said through clenched teeth. "But I'm not letting you take her." Rice sighed slightly, almost disappointed. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," he said. Elias didn't answer. He moved instead, charging straight toward the group carrying the child. Alarms echoed as more soldiers tried to block him. Elias fought through them, using every bit of strength left, pushing past blows, grabbing weapons, disarming, and moving forward without stopping. But every step cost him more energy. His body was still recovering from the stun. Still, he did not stop, because ahead of him, the child was calling him silently, not with words, but with that small reach-in hand. "Ra." Her faint voice echoed in his mind. Elias finally reached the group, and without hesitation, he jumped forward, grabbing the containment unit holding the child. A sudden shock blast hit him directly, throwing him backward into the ground. He groaned in pain, but quickly forced himself up again. "Stop this," Rice said firmly, walking closer. "She is property of command now." Elias wiped blood from the side of his mouth, his eyes burning with anger. "She's not property," he said. "She's a child." Rice paused for a moment, then shook his head slowly. "You still don't understand," he replied. But Elias did not care anymore. He looked at the containment field, then at the child inside. Her small hands were pressed against the barrier, trying to reach him. That was all he needed to see. Elias took a deep breath, then did something no one expected. He turned and grabbed a nearby energy core from the broken system. A warning signal instantly started flashing. "Warning. Unstable power source." Rice's eyes widened slightly. "Stop him," he shouted. But Elias was already moving. He activated the core manually, overloading it. Energy began to surge through the room, lights flickering violently, systems shutting down one by one. "Are you insane?" Rice shouted. Elias didn't respond. He moved toward the containment unit, forcing the overloaded energy into the locking system. The barriers around the child began to weaken, flickering, cracking. Soldiers fired at him, but he used the chaos as cover, pushing forward despite the pain. The energy core was reaching critical levels now, everything shaking, alarms screaming loudly. Elias reached the containment unit, slamming his hand against the release panel. "Hold on," he whispered, looking at the child. The system broke. The barrier collapsed in one quick motion. Elias pulled the child out just as a massive explosion warning started flashing across the room. "Core overload imminent." Rice stepped back, realizing what was happening. "You're going to kill us all," he said. Elias looked at him one last time. "No," he replied calmly. "I'm saving her." He turned and ran, holding the child tightly in his arms, rushing toward the exit as the entire chamber began to collapse behind them. Walls cracked, energy surged, and the structure started falling apart. Soldiers scrambled to escape, but it was too late for most. Elias kept running, his body barely holding together, but he didn't slow down. The child clung to him tightly, safe again, but scared. As they reached the corridor, a massive explosion erupted behind them, lighting up the entire ruins. The blast pushed them forward, throwing them out into the open battlefield. Elias landed hard on the ground, still holding the child, refusing to let go. For a moment, everything was silent again. Smoke filled the sky, the facility behind them collapsing completely. Elias lay there, breathing heavily, looking up at the sky. The child moved slightly in his arms, weak but alive, and in that moment, Elias understood something clearly. He had crossed every line, broken every order, and destroyed his own path. But he had saved her, and for him, that was enough. The battlefield was silent again, but this silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, broken, and filled with the dust of destruction. The sky was still dark with smoke from the collapsing alien facility, and distant fires burned across the ruins. Elias lay on the ground for a moment, his body exhausted, every muscle aching from the explosion and the escape. His breathing was slow and heavy, but he was still holding the child tightly. The small alien child moved slightly in his arms, weak but alive, its glowing lines dim but steady. "You're safe now," Elias whispered softly, his voice tired but calm. The child looked up at him, its eyes blinking slowly, as if trying to understand everything that had just happened. For a few seconds, there was only silence between them. No war, no commands, no soldiers, just the sound of wind moving through broken metal. Elias slowly tried to sit up, using one arm to push himself, his body shaking slightly. In the distance, the remains of Commander Rice's unit were retreating, regrouping after the collapse. They were no longer chasing, but watching from afar. Unsure of what had just happened, Elias knew they would come again, but not now, not after this. He looked down at the child again. "We made it," he said quietly, almost surprised at his own words. The child reached out slowly and touched his face, its small hand warm now, not cold like before. It made a soft sound. "Ra." Elias gave a faint, tired smile. "Yeah," he said gently. "I'm still here." He looked around at the ruins, the broken battlefield that had once been full of war and orders. Now only silence remained. But something had changed, something bigger than the battle. Elias slowly stood up, holding the child carefully in his arms again, even though his body was barely able to move. He took a slow breath and looked at the horizon, for the first time since the war began. He did not feel like a soldier. He did not feel like a weapon. He felt like a protector. Behind them, the collapsed facility continued to burn, its secrets buried under rubble and fire. The truth of the alien race slowly disappearing into the smoke. Elias knew what it meant. No one would believe what he had seen. No one would accept it. To command, this child was still a threat, still an unknown power, still something to control or destroy. But to him, it was something else entirely. It was a life, a trust, a choice. The child leaned closer to him, resting its head against his chest, finally calm. Elias tightened his grip slightly, careful not to hurt her. "We're not going back," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. A faint sound echoed in the distance. Ships, but not attacking ones. They were regrouping human forces, scanning the battlefield. Elias knew they would eventually find him, but he was ready now. He looked down at the child and nodded slightly. "If they come," he said softly, "I'll protect you again." The child did not answer, but it didn't need to. It already trusted him completely. Time passed slowly. The wind carried ash across the ruins, and the battlefield began to fade into darkness as night approached. Elias sat down again, holding the child close, resting for the first time in what felt like forever. He looked at the sky, filled with broken stars and smoke. All his life, he had been told that aliens were enemies, that survival meant destruction, that mercy was weakness. But now in this quiet moment, he understood something different. Strength was not in orders, it was in choice. The child shifted slightly and made a small sound, almost like sleep. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "You changed everything," he whispered softly. Far above them, faint signals moved across the sky. Human ships scanning the battlefield, searching for survivors, searching for truth. But what they would find was not what they expected, because the man they sent to destroy aliens had chosen to save one instead, and that choice would not stay hidden for long. Elias slowly stood again, holding the child close as he began walking into the ruins, away from the battlefield, away from the war, not as a soldier, but as something new, a protector of what was left. The child opened its eyes one last time and looked at him. And in that moment, without words, without language, a bond was formed that neither war nor command could break. Elias looked forward into the dark horizon and whispered, "Let them come." Because now, he was no longer following orders, he was choosing the future, and for the first time in a long time, the universe did not feel like it belonged to war. It felt like it belonged to them.